Fantastic. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this parallel session today. This has been a fantastic ASM so far, and I hope you enjoy this session as much as I'm looking forward to it as well. We have a terrific panel today and some great speakers, and I'm just going to share the parallel session program with you again. As you can see, we're going to cover quite a wide array of subjects, all of which I hope you find engaging and interesting. And I'd like to just move on. And before I do that, let me just clarify. We're going to keep questions until the end of the session. So the end of the panel session, rather. So keep all questions to the panel session. Again, let me just demonstrate. There is the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen. So please feel free to log questions there. Or else you can ask a question in person by using the hop-in question function too. If there's any questions about how to do any of that, again, there are people moderating the chat function, so please ask any technical questions there, and we will deal with them as quickly and efficiently as we can. So to get on with things, I'm going to start off presenting. My name is Susie Syrett, and I am the network's peer researcher. And there's a lot that we've done this year in terms of patient and public involvement that, on a personal level, as somebody who has lived experience of mental health problems myself, has been extremely exciting and really positive, actually, particularly, I think, when we're living in a world right now that maybe is bringing challenges to all of us and limiting the things that we can do. To feel that this is still very central and important to the network and beyond in all research faculties, actually, is something that definitely encourages me and brightens my day. And I hope this presentation lets me share a little bit about what we've been doing and is something that you find interesting, positive, and inspiring, maybe even too. But let's get on with that and see. So the first slide. And again, this is kind of summing up, I suppose, the world we're all in right now. You know, I wanted to start with this because actually we've been continuing to engage with our PPI board and using Zoom to do that. And Zoom is not an ideal format for a lot of people. Regardless of whether people have mental health problems, it presents its own challenges. And something I'm immensely proud of our board for is just how creatively we've all thought about this and how we've looked to make Zoom an accessible function for everybody who's taking part and to be able to do so in ways that support people while they're using Zoom during our board meetings. So here's just a few things that we've looked at, and I wanted to bring this up just before we get into the meat of this presentation and looking at the strategy document and the things that we've developed, because actually I think this is really good grounding for anyone running a Zoom meeting, particularly with individuals who may experience challenges that make Zoom a little bit more difficult to engage with than it might otherwise. So what we've done is we've really spoken with our members. I mean, I guess what you learn in PPI is not to make assumptions, just go ask people. And I think that's what we've done, and hopefully we've listened. If you look at the Code of Conduct document, you'll see that within that, as well as asking what we'd expect of people, we've also put in commitments from ourselves. And I think that's really important. I think that's a really good standing point for any PPI work. It's not just about what your PPI engagement can give you, it's what you need to provide to create an environment in which PPI is properly supported and that people feel comfortable and safe in taking part, and also that you're looking to eliminate any problems that might otherwise get in the way. So part of this is, I'm just going to pick a few of these expenses. When we have face-to-face meetings, we would usually give people travel expenses, so it makes sense to us that we will give people expenses for taking part from their homes. Running a computer costs money. We're very fortunate in that all our PPI board members have computers or iPads or phones with which they're able to use to contribute. But even if they hadn't, we'd have been happy for people to take part just by phone calls or through the mail or email or whatever suits them better. But yes, we want people to be comfortable during our meetings. That requires making a coffee, having lights on, and all those things cost money. So it makes sense to us to provide expenses for Zoom meetings, just as we would for face-to-face meetings. We want to make sure our online meetings are a safe space for everyone attending. And let's face it, sitting looking at a screen with up to 10 people staring back at you is quite an uncomfortable experience for most of us. So again, we offer people the opportunities to contribute during meetings, either verbally during a meeting, or if they feel less comfortable about doing that, by email afterwards, or by contacting us in a way that suits them. In short, We have so many valuable voices in our PPI board that we want them to be heard. And it's up to us to enable that, not our PPI board. So we're always looking for ways to make communication and involvement easier for everyone. I'm now going to bring in a colleague of mine, George, who is a PPI board member, and he wanted to contribute to this presentation today. So George, if you're there, it would be lovely to hear from you. Please bear with us, this stuff can get a little complicated. Okay, George doesn't seem to be there just now, but hopefully he'll be able to join later in the presentation. I'm keeping my fingers crossed anyway, because I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So this slide here is our organogram, and really we wanted to create a diagram that showed in a visual way just how entrenched and how core to our network our PPI group is. And as you can see, it pretty much overlaps every aspect of what the network does. It's really important to us that our PPI voices are central, because PPI involves people who would be on the receiving end of treatments and who are invested to our research. And we want to hear those voices and have them prominently featured within our network. We also have a PPI worker who is Chris White, and I just want to say that Chris isn't able to join us today due to ill health, which really is a shame for all of us, because Chris has contributed hugely to the PPI group and to the network generally, and it's a real shame he's not here today. Chris, if you're watching, we wish you well and hope you're better soon. So, just moving on. This is our PPI engagement slide. Now, as you can see, it's a fluid model. We really want to aim at, I just see George appear. So George, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, that was a nuisance. How many's here?
George, you're live, speaking to everyone.
All right.
So please go ahead.
Right, I'll just say my piece then, eh?
Go for it.
My name's George McMeekin. I have a lived experience of 35 years as a mental health service user based in Forth Valley. I've been engaged in a working partnership with my insightful occupational therapist, Pat Martin, for the past 16 years. I've endured numerous frustrating setbacks, but notched up several successes within the voluntary sector. Pat and I established Dynamic Wheel, and we're currently developing it as a community interest company. Down through the years, I've served in several focus groups and committees that seek to tackle fashionable aspects of mental health care, but unfortunately they never have achieved anything of significance. So I'm hopeful that my venture now into patient and public involvement provides an altogether more effective and meaningful time for me this time around. NHS research offers me a new opportunity, a different approach. PPI contributes to shaping research into mental health in Scotland. So I feel as if I'm on the brink of being listened to at last and not just ticking a box. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Those are lovely words, and thank you for joining us today. That's really appreciated. Thank you. And look, George will be present in our panel later on. So if you have any questions for him, I'm sure he'll be delighted to answer any that he can later on in the panel. Thanks, George.
All right, thank you.
So again, this is our PPI involvement slide, and as you can see, it's flexible involvement, and that's really important to us because we want our PPI engagement to be on our PPI members' terms. Life changes happen to everyone, circumstances change. There are times in all of our lives where we're better equipped to be engaged in things, and other times where we'd rather take a step or two back. And our model really accommodates that. It's looking to reduce burden really on our PPI community. We want people to feel that this is something that is positive in their lives and enabling, and brings a feeling of accomplishment to their lives too. So taking part in a way that fits and suits our individual members is something we're delighted to accommodate, and is a model that we're really seeking to encourage across the board. So when we look at engagement, what are we talking about? Well, these are the groups of people that we look at in PPI. And again, I know some of these terms might not necessarily fit with everybody's idea of terms, but these are the ones we're using just for the sake of this slide. Again, language around PPI is always a very complex issue. And again, happy to talk about that later on during the panel as well, if you like. So the types of involvement that we have are these. And actually, if we're looking at what stages of the research process we might have these people involved in, let me give you some examples. So we look to provide advice to the NRS Mental Health Network Management Board around the development of PPI itself. This is very much an ongoing process. We're still developing our PPI board, and we're really excited about where we hope to develop it in the future. We look to provide PPI consultation to study development and design. So any mental health research trials that come our way, we're more than happy to engage and advise on those aspects. We look to promote and support recruitment in the research studies that the network supports. Again, this is something that PPI can be incredibly insightful with and really, really productive in. And it's a facet of our board that I think we can really develop and help in really meaningful ways across research in Scotland. And of course, there's the dissemination of findings. We live in a world where we now have a variety of types of media that different people find easier or harder to engage with, depending on their preferences. And again, having a PPI board to advise in those things is incredibly beneficial and opens up lots of ideas for research studies in how they disseminate. As you'll see, we have information, consultation, collaboration, and control across the top. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what those mean. Sorry, I just jumped forward a slide by mistake, sorry. So by information, we are looking to promote research and involvement, link with the voluntary organisations and user groups, and improve research dissemination. Consultation is asking for opinions, so focus groups, advisory panels, surveys and questionnaires, research priority settings, reviewing research applications and informing research practice. Collaboration, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean supporting learning to students and academics and involvement, design of research-related materials so that we're making that as accessible as possible for participants and easy to read. Advisory group membership, co-design of research ideas, peer research roles within studies, including analysis and writing. And that's something that I'm very much involved in. Again, as a person of lived experience, my peer research role means that those are parts of the research trials that I take part in a lot. And I think have been able to make a positive difference over the years. Public involvement events, supporting recruitment and follow-up. And if we look at control, power over key decisions, we're looking to promote innovative approaches to supporting involvement in research and patient lived experience involvement in research. We really do believe, and the evidence is starting to show, that involving people with lived experience in the research process not only improves recruitment and helps retain participants, but actually helps shape better outcomes and make sure that the studies that we're doing are focused in areas that are meaningful for our participants and also for those people in Scotland living with those conditions. So now I want to talk through this slide. It looks a little complicated, but bear with me. So what you see here are our deliverables, the network deliverables that we're committed to. And we also have our objectives that drive those deliverables. So let me talk you through each objective, and we also have a time frame, which you'll see shortly. So the first network objective was to engage with the public and involve them in clinical research. And as you can see, the top deliverable was to initiate development of our PPI community. I'm happy to say that's something we completed in January 2020, although we're still looking to develop it further, and we always will be, so that's an ongoing thing. The second one was to improve public confidence in and the understanding of clinical research through greater patient and public involvement. And again, our deliverables there were to establish a PPI board and to support and work with the PPI board to facilitate diverse and flexible engagement. Again, that's something we achieved in September 2020 and that we're looking to go forward on and progress with up to 2021 in March. The next one was to develop and support alliances with key groups. By key groups, I mean the public, researchers, government, appropriate interest groups, funders, and sponsors. And our deliverable is to disseminate our PPI strategy to researchers in Scotland through information resources and engagement and events like today. Again, happy to answer more detailed questions about any of these should you want to ask them later in the panel. All of these were delivered, we're looking to deliver by March 2021. The next one was to identify and act on barriers that impede patient and public involvement in research. And again, we look to deliver that by producing materials to support training and good practice implementations for PPI involvement recommendations and for researchers. The third one, which we hope again to achieve by March 2021, was to use our role to influence the profile and enactment of PPI in mental health research in Scotland. And our deliverable with that was to identify and work with a broad range of stakeholders. These final three have been incredibly important to us as well, and we're looking forward to achieving them. With the PPI board that we have and with the support of the rest of the network, I'm confident that we will. We're looking to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of public and patient involvement in and feedback on research. Basically, we want to know how we're doing. Is our PPI board making a difference? And if it is making a difference, in what areas is it making a difference in? Also, how can we strengthen it and develop it further to become a real forefront of our research model? So our deliverables currently on that, our network staff are to develop and complete a network PPI activity log to keep tabs on what we're doing. Management group will monitor progress on implementation of the PPI strategy and survey stakeholders. So we will survey our stakeholders to determine the added value from PPI. This is an exciting time to be part of PPI. It's something I've been involved in for quite a few years now, and to be part of this board as it's progressing really has brought a lot of happiness and inspiration, but also value to my life. I really feel that my lived experiences are being heard and listened to, and in a small way are looking to shape research in mental health in Scotland going forward. I feel very proud of my PPI board. I feel that we as a unit work extremely well together and bring a breadth of experience that can only benefit those of us who are in research. Thank you for listening today. And again, should you have any further questions about the PPI board or my role as a peer researcher, I'd be happy to answer them later in the panel, or you can email at info@smhrn.org or follow us on Twitter at NRS Mental Health Network. Thanks very much. Okay, coming up next, we have Gordon Johnson, and I'm just going to share my slide again, if you'll just excuse me for a second. Let me tell you about Gordon. Gordon is an independent consultant and peer researcher and worked with a variety of universities and third sector organisations. I'm happy to say that I've worked with Gordon before, and he really is an absolute champion of lived experience research. His research interests include bipolar disorder, the physical health of people with lived experience of mental health, and sorry, I can't say that word right now, Gordon, sorry. Citizenship, there we go, and involvement in a mental health context. I'm going to hand over to Gordon now. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Okay, hopefully people can now see my screen.
Yep.
Cool. So thanks, Susie. It was a nice introduction. So I'm going to talk a bit about online engagement and some of the things we've learned, hopefully over the period of lockdown when the world has changed for all of us. So to set the scene, I'm sure some of you will recognise a young Bill Gates there. And back when he set up a little software company in the late 70s, he talked about the goal of him and his partner, Paul Allen, as being to have a computer on every desk and in every home. Now, that was a very different world, and people thought that was a bit crazy, because why would every house need a computer in it, for goodness sake? We've obviously moved on a long way since then. Think how many computers there are in your house. Now, we know that they have almost become ubiquitous, but it's easy sometimes to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone uses computers all the time, when in fact we know from research that about 88% of homes in Scotland use the internet. And I'll come back to that statistic just a little later. So there are, of course, many pros to digital engagement. We know there are lots of options for platforms to use, and it's been interesting to discover Hopin for the first time today, just about getting to use it. We know that it's a convenient medium for many people. We don't have to travel. Perhaps there are people who've been able to attend today's meeting who might not have been able to had it been held in Edinburgh or Glasgow. It's easier to schedule meetings and appointments sometimes online, and lots of people can get involved from their own home in comfort in ways in which perhaps they couldn't in other times. So digital engagement works well, probably for most people, most of the time. But let's think about the cons. I guess we've all seen that sort of screen many times recently. We've moved from in March thinking how great and exciting it was to be going into a digital meeting, online connectivity, all that sort of new space age stuff. Whereas now I think we're all in the case of, oh God, not Zoom, not Teams again, not another long period of sitting in front of a screen looking. And we know that sometimes there are negatives as well to digital engagement. We know it can be more difficult to make real connections with people when we're sitting looking through a screen rather than talking to someone direct face to face. It's quite a surreal experience to be sitting here on my chair in my bedroom, talking to my computer and hoping that somebody out there somewhere is listening to me. So we lose a bit of that social interaction. We don't always see body language the same way as we do one-to-one. And crucially, when we look only at digital engagement, we always have to remember that we are excluding some people. I mentioned earlier that 88% of people have internet access. That, of course, means 12% don't. But let's think, who are the 12% that don't? Well, we know that when we look at the highest income groups, it's about 99% of people use internet, compared with about 65% for lowest groups. More homeowners than those in socially rented tenancies, many more younger people than older people. So when we think about digital engagement and who we're excluding, we know it's going to tend to be those who are poorer, older, perhaps lived in more deprived areas. So in terms of engagement, think who we're excluding. If we're doing research, think about how we're actually skewing the sample that we use. Think about how we're actually building in some of those inequalities into our work. And crucially for an organisation that deals with mental health, research tells us that 29% of people with what they define as long-term physical or mental illnesses don't use the internet. So that's a real challenge for those of us who are trying to do engagement in mental health, when such a large percentage of the people that we want to engage with, who we want to engage with us, simply don't use internet. And that, of course, brings us to the digital divide, something that's always been there, but something that's come very much more sharply into focus in the COVID period, when education, when lots of services, information, access to financial products is all done through the internet. And that means if you don't have internet access, you have real difficulties, you have real exclusion there. So what do we need to support people through the digital divide? Well, we know we need the kit in the first place, you know, a PC, a laptop, something with a camera and a microphone, a smartphone. Most people have that sort of kit these days, but not everyone. But crucially, you also need broadband or a phone signal, and we know in some more remote areas those aren't always there. In some parts of Scotland, the only way to get internet access is through satellite broadband packages, and those tend to start about £60 a month. So if you are perhaps on benefits or on furlough and only getting 80% of your wages right now, then are you really going to pay £60 a month for internet access? For some people, there are issues around cost of subscriptions or data plans to mobile phones. And even for many people who use the internet, it's one thing having the confidence to perhaps send emails and do a bit of internet surfing. It's something else to download and install Teams or Zoom's applications, to set up online meetings, video appointments, and get involved with that. So those are the barriers. How do we go about meeting some of those? Well, for me, it's a human rights issue. Right to information, right to assembly, right to involvement. In a digital age, those are now coming more and more through digital means, through internet. And that means we need to look at how we can support people to do that. How we can not only provide them with the kit they need, but ensure that they have the advantages of access, and that they have the skills and employment to do that. So if we're looking at good digital engagement, what does that actually mean? Well, for me, the most crucial thing is choice. It shouldn't be digital first or digital only. We should be providing a range of ways to become involved. And many of the type of platforms that are there now for digital engagement allow you, for example, to phone in. If we're running research questionnaires, let's not always do them online. We can still post things to people with a bit of organisation. We can still find ways that people can get involved offline. If we're running events during the day because it suits us, we can find ways that people who are working can perhaps access the information and feed thoughts in the evening. Another big thing that a lot of organisations are doing is to provide kind of peer-based support to people. So rather than simply saying, we'll send you a list of instructions about how you download Teams and get yourself registered and online, we actually have somebody working with someone using a community development approach to take them through that one-on-one, the sort of digital champions approach, so that rather than simply being set technical information that you might not understand, or if something goes wrong, you don't know quite what to do next, then having someone on hand who can provide not just technical information, but can show you how to do things. Because we all know that many of us learn far more from being shown something than simply told how to do it. So for all of the barriers that exist in terms of good digital information, there are ways to get around them if we try hard enough. And we can use the fact that so many things have gone online during the COVID period. We've sped up that kind of digital engagement process that we know was happening anyway. More and more things were going online. But COVID has both accelerated that pace of change and given us an added impetus to think about some of the solutions we need. So hopefully that's been a quick tour through some of the pros and cons of digital information. Hopefully I've also given you some things to think about in terms of some of the pros and cons of digital approaches and some of the ways we can help people who are perhaps not as confident or don't find it easy to become involved. Because crucially, when we talk about engagement, it has to be engagement of everyone, not just the select few. Thanks for listening, and if there are questions, I'll do my best to answer them in the panel session at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Gordon. That's an extremely important presentation. And again, you know, the idea that people would be cut out of being able to take part in things due to not accessing digital is a really important consideration that we all need to be aware of. And, you know, it's on us again to think more creatively about how we engage with people if digital is an option for them, particularly in a time of COVID. Next, I'm going to hand over to Neil Quinn. I'm delighted to have Neil with us today. Neil has a long-standing expertise in mental health and is published widely on mental health inequalities, stigma, discrimination, and citizenship. And I managed to say that word this time. He's currently involved in a funded CSO program, that's the Chief Scientist's Office, program on COVID-19 and mental health disparities, and another on the psychosocial impact of social distancing on care home relatives. Neil has lots of experience of undertaking community-based participatory research in partnership with people with lived experience. He's currently developing a peer research project entitled COVID-19, Realising the Right to Health for Marginalised Communities. And it really is a pleasure to have Neil with us today. And Neil, handing over to you now.
Thanks very much, Susie, for the introduction and for hosting today's session. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here for this network event. I've spoken before at the annual scientific meeting, I think around 9 or 10 years ago, and it's great to be back. So today I'm going to speak briefly about the challenges of doing participatory research during this COVID-19 period. As Susie said, my interest in this topic comes from the standpoint of being an engaged academic with a background in social work, community development and public health, who has a strong interest and commitment to community-based participatory research. I've been involved in a number of participatory research studies where academics, people with lived experience, public and third sector organisations come together to develop research projects. And all parties having a role in shaping which questions should be asked, how the research should be conducted, and then being involved at all stages of the research process. And as Susie mentioned, this includes a current research project on the impact of COVID-19 on marginalised communities. I recognise there's a strong critique of this participatory approach to research and questions asked about the power imbalances that exist within the process. And I want to acknowledge this can be an issue, but that from my experience of being involved, there's a genuine attempt by everyone to work together to ensure that everyone's voices are heard within the process. What I want to discuss today is not participatory research per se, but the challenges of using this approach during the pandemic. I want to discuss a number of challenges and how these might be addressed. So the first main challenge for conducting participatory research that I wanted to highlight is an ethical one in terms of the implications of engaging research participants in research during a highly stressful and uncertain time, such as COVID. For example, it might be that participants' normal routines are disrupted and they may be experiencing negative effects associated with lockdown, such as social isolation and frustration, for example. A second challenge is when research involves marginalised and vulnerable communities. And there's a question of whether the researcher can be truly immersed in the research context, if they're sitting comfortably at home while research participants may be living in highly chaotic environments and suffering from the pandemic. This begs the question of whether this may put the equity the research is built upon at risk. Another challenge is around how trust is built amongst the research team, which is a hallmark of participatory research. This trust is normally built through in-person group meetings in order to create more equitable research partnerships. Community-based participatory research prioritizes collaborative leadership and a reflexive iterative process to help create knowledge for positive community impact. This can be more challenging during the pandemic. Fourthly, I also wanted to highlight the issue of digital exclusion highlighted by Gordon. We see in some countries participants in marginalised rural communities may be reliant on venues such as internet cafes for their network access. Lockdown restrictions in many countries may result in the closure or reduced opening hours of these establishments. And as a result, taking part in participatory research from a distance or engaging in online learning activities may become a significant challenge for many participants. And in this country, we see certain communities with poorer internet coverage who can be excluded from the research process. Finally, there may be ethical concerns by participants that it can be more difficult to maintain confidentiality and anonymity through a platform such as Zoom. With some research participants, there may be issues around conducting research with participants at home and the safety of participants in doing so, for example, in relation to gender-based violence. So these are just some of the challenges to undertaking participatory research during COVID. I think it's always important to ask whether the research could be postponed until more normal circumstances resume. However, for a number of topics, it's important to conduct the research, particularly in learning about COVID and its impact. But this question, I think, should always be considered collectively by the team. I'd like to just finish with some thoughts about addressing these challenges and also promising practice that's emerging in relation to conducting participatory research in these times of COVID. The first point I'd like to make is about accessing participants. We assume it's necessarily going to be harder to reach people during the pandemic. However, I found that in some studies, it's actually been easier to engage people. This is because some participants find it easier to participate from the comfort and safety of their own homes, rather than making the journey to another venue. It can also be easier to reach participants across the country and have greater geographical reach within studies. A key question is around choice of research method and ensuring the adopted method feels comfortable to both lived experience researchers and participants and the research team generally. It may be important not to be wedded and to consider moving away from the traditional interview format and be more open to trying out creative participatory methods. One promising approach that's grown in prominence during the pandemic is the use of mobile diaries and using smartphones to collect participatory visual data remotely. Photo and video diaries can be used to collect participant narratives and experiences in a way that's empowering for participants because participants are in control of the data collection. Participants also take part in the editing process during the analysis phase, or can do, following filming, which is in keeping with the participatory ethos. For some participants, there is a more user-friendly method. This is a more user-friendly method of data collection, so it's important to be flexible when choosing our method. The other aspect to consider is in relation to the research team. I think it's important to find ways of building relationships between different stakeholders in the research team in ways that takes account of COVID. There's a need to work even harder at this relationship building when it's virtual. It can involve more informal catch-ups as well as formal research meetings. It's also about recognising the stress that the research team members can be under in terms of the mental health impact and providing peer support. There's also a need to build a culture that intentionally fosters relationships, trust and respect across the participatory research team. And it's important to find new ways of doing this during COVID. So these are just some ideas to address the challenges, but I welcome your thoughts on this and the thoughts of other panel members during the panel discussion. I'd like to conclude by saying there are huge challenges in conducting participatory research during COVID-19, but also there are ways of addressing these challenges, and there are opportunities too during this time of COVID. Thank you for listening today.
Thanks very much, Neil. That was a fantastic presentation, very interesting and very prescient of the situation we're all in just now. I'm wondering how research is going to continue going forward, but also, you know, what we can do as researchers to better engage with people in what is a very different landscape, particularly where it comes to communicating with people in different ways. Thank you, Neil. It's now time for our panel. We are running amazingly to time, which I'm very pleased about. Well done, everyone. And we have another panel member with us who I haven't introduced yet, and her name is Stephanie Allen. Steph is a PhD student with lived experience of a schizophrenia diagnosis who is currently writing up her thesis, which focuses on implementation of digital interventions for psychosis, and she's a member of Glasgow University's Psychosis Research Group. Steph is currently a research assistant on the Avatar 2 trial and is also interested in service user involvement and leadership within research. Hi, Steph.
Hi everyone.
Hi, lovely to have you aboard. And I'm just wondering if we have questions from anybody that would like to ask one. If not, I have a few for you all, so you're not getting off lightly. Louise, do we have anybody coming through with a question at all? Or you can ask your questions in the chat function and I will endeavour to pick them up there if you prefer that option.
I was just wondering about the challenges you've experienced in conducting PPI, and if there's anything you could say about around that.
I think, well, let me have good manners and pass that over to my panel members first before I can. So, Neil, do you have any thoughts about that?
In terms of, sorry, Catherine, could you repeat the question? Sorry, I just missed.
Louise, could you repeat that again, please?
Yeah, it's just a general thought about challenges of conducting PPI research across the board over the span of your careers in this sector.
Yes, I think that in terms of, I suppose the challenges, as I see it, is ensuring that it's representative. I mean, from my experience of doing participatory work, I guess it's there are communities that are probably easier to reach, and when there's additional challenges, often in participation work, it's easy to shy away from trying to ensure that we reach all communities, and even within communities, those who perhaps are more more difficult to reach. So I think it's important to ensure that processes are representative, and that we try to be representative in terms of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, for example. So, and also in terms of levels of disability. So I think for me that would be a major challenge to consider, is around ensuring representativeness.
Can I ask my panel members to raise their hand if they'd like to answer a question? Steph, Gordon, or George, would you like to have an answer for Louise's question at all? If not, that's fine.
I suppose might be a bit niche, but one challenge from our own research we did, well, we tried to do as much as possible a co-produced piece of research on people's experiences with accessing personal independence payment and employment and support allowance for a mental health problem in Glasgow. And very much when you're writing up findings and research, you're very strongly encouraged to present a coherent narrative, but we just very firmly wrote that researchers who didn't have experience of the benefit system and those who did had a different take on the data which we gathered through qualitative interviews, and we felt that it was important to foreground that and just write it as we didn't reach agreement, and that's okay. I suppose that's just one challenge I've encountered.
Yeah. Gordon, please.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch again on something that I touched on in my presentation, and I very much agree with Neil in terms of listening to all of the voices, including those that we tend not to hear as much. I think one of the ways we do that is by using a range of different methods of engagement and not just thinking about one method, because something that I've realised over the years is that for some reason lots of people don't seem to want to come to meetings. Lots of people don't seem to think that sitting in a drafty community hall of an evening talking about some fascinating subject is the greatest thing in the world. So we need to think about the only way to get people's views isn't necessarily to have them face to face in the one place, or even in the one place via the medium of video. Why not have that kind of more asynchronous input where people are free to give us their thoughts when it suits them rather than when it suits us, and we pull them all together sometime later? But, let's use mixed methods, because different things suit different people.
I think that's an excellent point. If I could add to that, I think that something that's really kind of expanded in the last few years has been the language around PPI, and when you have words for things, it's much easier to explain to people that they are concrete, real entities that are of value. And I guess we do tend to find ourselves sometimes stuck between sort of clinicians and academics who might not really see PPI to the true extent that we can see the benefits that it brings. We may not realize that, but now that we have the language to be able to explain better, and also we're getting the opportunity to talk about it on public forums like this today, will hopefully expand not just the understanding and awareness of PPI and research and the value of it, but actually really kind of bring home to people that this is hopefully going to become a normal part of research. And having a PPI board or a peer researcher on your research team is not only something that will is a box to tick, but it's actually a valuable and useful piece of a research team. It can bring value to your recruitment, to your retainment, and also to shaping your outcomes as well. So making sure that your research is pertinent and to the point and relevant as possible, and as easy to engage with for your participants too. I guess one last thing I just wanted to touch on, if that's okay, and again I'm going to sort of form a question out of this as well, so be on your guard, panel. Which is that we look at the world we're in just now, and we look at this conference today, and we're taking part over Hop-in, and we've all talked about Zoom earlier on in our presentations today too. And do you feel that in a way COVID has kind of forced us into using these forms of media and these platforms. And that, do you feel hopeful that if and when the world returns to a semblance of normality again, where we can engage face to face, we'll find ourselves with many more options in terms of engaging with people with lived experience? Or do you think we'll go back to the old ways and just do things as we did them before?
No, that's from my point of view. COVID has simply accelerated facilities like Zoom and Hopin and all of these conference call facilities. So no, this is always going to happen, but it's just come a lot quicker than we might have imagined. Taking up Gordon's comments earlier, Susie, I think it's important for me to say that as a service user, that my sort of history in this stuff is that I've been involved in a few consultation committees and focus groups and stuff that really haven't amounted to hell of beans. But by this event today alone, it's early days yet for me as a member of the PPI board. But the thing that really strikes me here is that people are listening. And that's a key factor, is that, if you've got a strong enough opinion and a strong enough view that you want to hear it expressed, you'll go to any drafty community hall that's going to provide a listening forum, That's the important part. It's not really the method by which you get your message across. It's how effective you get it across.
Thanks, George. So I see we have a couple of questions in the chat function. So if it's okay with the panel, I'd like to ask a couple of those on behalf of the people who've asked them. So the first question is from Rowena Pierce, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, Rowena. A few of the panelists mentioned digital exclusion and the digital divide. In light of the current COVID situation, we rely even more heavily on digital research tools. How can we bridge this gap?
Happy to start the discussion if you want. Thanks, Susie. Thanks, Rena, for the question. I guess one issue would be about access to equipment. So we know that perhaps part of what drives the digital divide is that some communities have less access to digital devices and tools. So I guess looking at ways of trying to access resources for those communities to enable, for instance, there's a group that I'm connected with where all members of the group have been issued with iPads, so they've identified resources to enable that to happen. So I think finding ways of ensuring access to commitment for communities that have been marginalised in some way, I think would be one element of it.
Thank you, Neil. Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, I the key, like lots of things for me, is good planning. Think about these things at the time of your grant applications and your project design. Don't think about them later, so that you have resources built in to support engagement. And I think that the key for me is the combination of the kit, the skills, and the confidence. And we can give people the kit. We can work with them to build their skills. And if we have all of that, we will help them to build up their confidence. But I think we need to be clear that it's a new thing for many people to do, to get involved in research. It's a new thing for many people to do, to get involved in online stuff. So when we're asking to do two new things together, it's only right that we kind of help and support them through that process, rather than, I said before, just kind of sending them an email with a bunch of instructions and kind of leaving them to get on with it.
Yep, just to build up what Gordon and Neil were saying, just forewarned is forearmed. Even if we're giving out things like phones, so there's like digital access as part of a grant application, like just checking that you know how Zoom on a phone works for yourself. For example, I discovered that the hand raising function on Zoom doesn't really work well. if somebody's on the phone, which is actually, even though you might have thought you've made it accessible by providing like access through a smartphone or tablet, it might just be a bit different. So I suppose just ensuring choice, but also making sure that you've done research and you're providing tech and support in a format that works for people.
I think too, normalizing the idea of tech and support in that, you know, making it making the opportunity to ask for help with something just feel very normal, and that you're not in any way bothering someone or causing them a problem by not knowing how to work something. I think that all comes down to language and content and conduct of the trial and how you speak to people and how you interact with them. It's, you know, entirely normal that any of us face new technology, don't have a clue how to work it, and our participants shouldn't feel that we see them in any ways less because they might not be familiar with a piece of technology. So I think conduct and how we treat people and speak with them is very important in maintaining that communication. So we have a question. We have a question from Sinead Rhodes. I'm sorry to be sort of rushing here, but I'm just trying to fit in as many questions as we can manage. Just to say to anybody listening, by the way, there will be the Expo booth, PPI booth open after this session. So should you wish to come along and chat with me and possibly some other members of the panel if they're there, then we'd be delighted to see you there. And again, should you want to ask any questions by email, if this format doesn't suit you, I'll be supplying the email at the end of the session again. So please feel free to bring your questions to us in any way that suits you. Okay, so Sinead Rhodes, and again, I hope I pronounced that correctly, has a question. I have a task to work with lab-based researchers and to persuade them to engage in PPI. Their work doesn't involve human participants. Any tips for engaging them with the importance of PPI?
Happy to start, Susie. Thanks, Sinead, for the question.
Please,
Yeah,
go ahead.
and I think thanks to Elizabeth as well for helping us out by helping us with the answer, which was very useful, because I think, you know, you make a good point about you know, the importance of PPI is, you know, one important element is about demonstrating to researchers that, you know, by engaging in PPI, then they can translate their research findings to impact on policy and in practice. It's more likely if you know, if they engage in PPI, that the products or whatever medicines or whatever that they're developing, or the research they're doing, will be taken up in the real world. So I guess that's the, you know, the value of PPI. And there's all the agenda, I guess, around citizen science, for example, which looks at the, you know, how you involve citizens in the research process and equally in the dissemination of research. So that's one perspective, I think.
Thank you, Neil. Does anybody else have any comments to make?
If you've got like leadership in the team, like just encourage conversations about PPI and like learn from lived experience. Like if you're researching something that impacts people, like ADHD, for example, like maybe you could read something written by somebody who's had that experience, just to sort of have a holistic focus.
Absolutely. And I think something too that, you know, we maybe don't see as a resource, but I think is one, is reflecting on our own experiences of, you know, when we were younger, you know, when we weren't as experienced or hadn't become part of academia, say, or a clinician, and just the barriers that we found ourselves in terms of language in papers and how they're formatted, and really anything that you can think of that would make things easier for you, or someone that you know who might be interested in academia but isn't quite yet at that level to really understand research papers. And I don't mean that patronizingly. I mean, I find it really difficult to understand research papers at times, so I include myself in that. But if you can think of any ways to make it easier for yourself or that person, then please apply them, because I can bet you that those methods will improve things for other people too. To be clear, there's nothing, I always feel it's very interesting that there's this idea that academic papers should be complicated by design, it should be dense and hard to read by design, but actually I would say the opposite. I think the skill of good academic writing is to write things clearly and in plain language, so that you're opening your research to as many people as possible, not just a very, very small slice of the pie who understand big, complicated words. That doesn't feel like an effective writing to me.
I think the clue's in the title, PPI, patient and public involvement. There's no substitute for the spoken word in its simplest terms, you know. So you can read as much as you like, but you know, as you say, Susie, research papers can be quite a dry topic through no fault of their own. But as I say, the spoken word's valuable.
I hope so, George. And although I understand the challenges present to everybody writing papers, but that would be my hope. But again, something else I also think that, you know, would be great to see going forward is engaging with other forms of media to disseminate results. You know, we're seeing a lot of blogging and we're seeing a lot of plain language summaries happening, which are wonderful and definitely open the door to those of us who maybe aren't as familiar with academic languages, you know, we like to be. But at the same time, we have video, we have art, we have all sorts of ways. And, you know, it would be lovely to see trials accommodating funds to dissemination in more creative ways and seeing whether people find it easier to engage that way. So I think we are just about out of time. Let me just check and see if we have time for another question and if we have another one. Let's look. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that's been asked. I have one final question and we have a minute to answer it in. So I guess I'm going to ask a very quick answer question. What do you hope for PPI in the future and why? Neil, I'm going to put that to you first.
I suppose my hope would be that it has wider reach and impact. That, you know, it has more of an impact on research, on policy, and on practice, so that it grows in importance and influences the research and policy and agenda more.
Thanks, Neil. I think Beth, you have anything to say on that?
I'd like it to become more normal. It's just seen as something you do in research and just as valid as any other stage of the research process. Just as George says, like, spoken word to people, like, that's what matters.
George, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I would just say that as long as there's evidence that the PPI's views are being listened to and being put into effect, then that's as much as you can ask for.
Thanks, George. And finally,
yeah, I think the key is PPI just becoming a part of the research process that is in there because it's the right thing to do rather than it being an added extra that some people do. And I think part of that is about showing that it can make research better. So that kind of feedback loop, that PPI feedback to researchers on what has changed and researchers feedback to PPI on what they have changed as a result of what they've heard, so that it becomes that kind of, you know, synergistic relationship.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Well, I'd like to thank our panel members today and also our speakers. I've really enjoyed this session, and apart from struggling to pronounce the word citizenship today, but other than that, it's gone really well. And I always, at the end of these, feel just really enthused and inspired, not just by the people who presented today, but by those people who are taking the time to ask questions and come along and take part in this. Because I can see from the figures we've had a really high attendance, and that in itself is immensely encouraging to me, and I think to everyone who's taken part today. Thank you all, and we will now be moving over to the expo stand if you have any questions there. Or again, as I said, please feel free to email us or get on Twitter if you'd like to ask any further questions. But thank you again to my panel of Neil Quinn, Stephanie Allen, Gordon Johnson, and George Mermican. You've all been brilliant, and thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Susie. Nice to see you, Gordon. See you soon.
Take care.
Okay, bye.